(1969). 6-year-old Dennis Martin disappears under strange circumstances inside the Great Smokies National Forest in Tennessee, prompting one of the largest manhunts of all time. Father's Day weekend, a family tradition for the Martins as they camped together in Cades Cove, one of their favorite places on planet Earth, mine as well. If you've ever been, you'll know it is a beautiful place, full of black bear and elk and deer and wild turkey and everything good, except for the tourists. They would never have a family camping trip together again. They had camped together the night before at Cades Cove. The family gathered around a fire. Young Dennis and his older brother, as well as his grandfather and his father, and they told stories together and cooked a lovely dinner. The boys, rambunctious as always, chased around the campsite, excited for what tomorrow held. They left their camp near Russell Field and hiked to Spencefield near the Appalachian Trail. That was where they had planned to spend the night. When they arrived, they met another family that was camping closely by, and they had children of their own, and the two groups of youngsters gathered together playing. They went to play hide-and-go-seek, one of my favorites. When the other children came back without Dennis, the father grew concerned. He called for his son. There was no answer. He had last seen the young boy hiding behind a bush not far away, within his own line of sight. He never saw him move, but there was no Dennis. He began to jog up the trail, calling every few feet, and no answer. He ran nearly 2 miles until he was exhausted, calling for his son the entire way there and the entire way back. When he got back, he was frantic and out of breath, and he told his father, "Dad, we need to call for help." And they did. They called the forest rangers, and they came. Not just them. Nearly 1,400 other people had gathered together to help search for this young boy. They never found anything but a sock. Heavy rains, mists, bad weather, bears, elk, coyote, many other things. Even copperhead snakes have been proposed as a theory as to what happened, the exposure to the elements. But there are other, stranger theories. The father believes that someone or something took his son that day. The day that Dennis disappeared, a tourist by the name of Harold K. heard something horrifying, a scream in the distance that he said couldn't have belonged to a man, and then he saw a strange, unkept man running down the hill for his life and got into a car and sped away. Was the unkept man a suspect, or was he running from something? More in part 2, if you're interested, friends.
Julie Williams and Lolly Winans went to Shenandoah National Park, but never made it out. Julie and Lolly were both in their 20s and met at an organization in 1994 called the Woods Women. They were both very different from each other, but they became fast friends and eventually romantic partners. Lolly came from a well-off family, and she was studying to become a wilderness guide in college, and she was also known as a party girl. Julie, on the other hand, was a sport enthusiast and experienced tennis player. She spoke Spanish and worked with migrants and people suffering from abuse. She had actually just got a new job and was supposed to start June 1st, 1996. Julie and Lolly wanted to celebrate, so they planned a hiking trip to Shenandoah National Park starting May 19th. On the first day of their trip, they started at Pinnacles Ridge Overlook on Skyline Drive. After that, they started hiking White Oak Trail for a few days. One of the days it had started to rain, so they got a ride from a park ranger to bring them back to their car. They then went to Hawksbill, which is the highest peak in the national park. After hiking for some time, they found a place to camp on Bridle Trail. Now, this was only about a half a mile from where they parked their car. It was now May 24th, and sadly, this was their last day seen alive. Julie's father was expecting a phone call from them, but when he hadn't heard from them by May 31st, he contacted the police. They began searching immediately. They found their car fairly quickly. After finding the car, they then began searching nearby trails. Now, they did bring their dog with them on this camping trip, and after searching for some time, the police found their dog. Of course, finding the dog walking alone was very concerning to the police, so they began getting more people involved in the search, and on the next day, June 1st, they had found Julie and Lolly's bodies deceased. It was a very gruesome and violent scene, so I'm not going to explain it on here. So they started an investigation right away to find out who the attacker was. Despite having thousands of leads, a suspect hadn't emerged for over a year. The suspect was Darrell Rice. He had attempted to kidnap a Canadian girl, and they later found footage from when Julie and Lolly were in the park. He had entered and exited the park around the time that they were there. He was then indicted for the murders of Julie and Lolly. It was believed that the girls were targeted by this man because of their sexual orientation, by remarks he had said in the past. So they thought they had finally found the person responsible for this horrific crime. But he was never prosecuted or brought to trial. In 2003, a hair from the crime scene was tested, and it did belong to a male, but it did not match Darrell Rice's. So the charges towards him were dismissed. 30 years later, and it is still an open investigation to who ended the lives of these two beautiful people.
So y'all are just not going to talk about the little kid who disappeared within like 50 miles of Skinwalker Ranch? Well, I'll be happy to take the reins on that one because you know how I feel about unsolved mysteries. 12-year-old Garrett Bardsley disappeared in the Uinta Mountains August 20th, 2004. Garrett and his father Kevin woke up around 8 a.m. on a Boy Scout camping trip. There were a total of 18 scouts and 6 or 7 adults along on the trip. They headed to a lake for some fishing, and Garrett managed to soak his shoes, socks, and pants. Understandably, Garrett didn't want to wear wet clothes, so he told his father he was going to go back to camp to change. The rest of the Boy Scouts were up a hill only 150 to 250 feet away. Kevin knew Garrett knew where he was, so he allowed his son to walk alone, but kept an eye on him as he went around the lake, even shouting directions of which path Garrett should take. After 20 minutes, Kevin was wondering what was taking his son so long, so he went back to the camp and asked other boys if they had seen Garrett, and nobody had. A huge search of the area with hundreds of official and unofficial searchers started, but they only found a Nike sock belonging to Garrett. The sock was damp and crumpled up like Garrett had taken it off like he was going to get changed, which was in line with what his father said. The campsite was less than a quarter-mile away from the lake on a well-established path. Garrett did not have a backpack or any other provisions when he went missing, but he was carrying a short ice fishing pole, which was never located. Hundreds and hundreds of searchers looked for Garrett, even on horseback and using dogs, but no other trace of him could be found. Garrett's sock was half a mile away from where he disappeared in a granite boulder field. Authorities working this case believe that Garrett went into the boulder field trying to find shelter from the cold weather. Because of the mountainous terrain, the temperature dropped to around 18 degrees the night Garrett vanished. Police and Garrett's family do not believe that an abduction took place because there was no evidence of such. And at one point they said they don't believe Garrett made it past the first 48 hours that he was out in the wilderness. The official search for Garrett was called off after 9 days, but family and other volunteers continued to look for him. A 3-mile radius into the mountains was searched from the last place Garrett was seen, but no other evidence was ever found. What is strange about this case is authorities and Garrett's family pretty much wrote off a mountain lion attack and a bear attack. They said there was absolutely no evidence, no trace of blood, no clothing, nothing of Garrett's to be found. Yet they also said an abduction was unlikely. And Garrett was not the only person to disappear in this area over the years. What do you think happened to him?
Ocala National Forest truly is the Appalachia of Florida, and if that makes you pause or makes you upset, let me explain. Thanks to TikTok, we are all very aware of the rules of Appalachia. If you heard it, no you didn't. If you saw it, no you didn't. This rule also applies in Ocala National Forest, and for good reason. Things that you can encounter in Appalachia: cryptids, animals for sure, ghosts, and people that have lived there for generations, probably. Whether they were raised in the holler or in some other areas, Appalachia is full of culture and generations of people. What can you find in Ocala National Forest? A shit ton of cryptids, a shit ton of ghosts, cults, and serial killers. And that's in no particular order. You can take your pick, which is the worst. If you run into someone in Appalachia, it could be somebody who was raised in the holler all their life. It could be somebody with family in the mountains, someone who grew up there. And they are probably not going to outright attack you or be violent towards you without a very good reason. In Ocala National Forest, you just don't know. Because that forest is full of locals and tourists just having fun, as well as people up to some nefarious shit. If you're going to take a gamble and assume that you're just going to meet normal, nice people in Ocala National Forest, you might just end up dead wrong. Ocala National Forest has the rainbow people, and for everybody who thought I meant the gay people, no. That is their actual name. The Rainbow Gathering, the Rainbow Family, whatever you want to call them. Sincerely, a queer woman. There are other cults in Ocala National Forest as well, but I'm hesitant to talk about them because I don't want a target on my back, to be totally honest. I need to figure out exactly how to do it and keep myself safe. But yeah, there is a whole bunch going on in Ocala National Forest, and if you don't know what you're dealing with or you don't know what exactly is going on out there, you might be in for a rough time. So many people who live in Ocala National Forest have sent me messages saying that they have encountered things that they can't explain, even people who don't believe in the paranormal. Again, I had a woman reach out to me saying that she would hear her kids calling her from the woods at night when she knew for a fact her children were asleep in bed. Stuff like that is not completely unheard of in that forest. There were hundreds and hundreds of comments of people who just drove through the forest, not even stopping, saying that they got such an uncomfortable feeling that they had to roll their windows up, lock the doors. Some of them even had to turn their radio off because their radio went haywire, which is a normal phenomena in Ocala National Forest. There are dead zones all over. At least they didn't have the weird voices coming over their radio, though. That's a good thing. I also want to address people who were asking about the serial killer thing that I talked about in the last Ocala National Forest video that went viral. Some people were pointing out that it was a hunting ground for serial killers in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but they were like, it's not anymore, right? There aren't active serial killers there now. If there were active killers in that forest, we would not know about it because it is very close to Disney World, and that would be awful for tourism. I know I sound super tinfoil hat right now, but it's the truth. Florida relies heavily on tourism. Heavily. You can't just talk about this stuff and let people know that there might be active serial killers in that area and not scare off a few potential tourists. It's the same thing about the Everglades being close to South Beach and Miami and all of those hot spots. That is why a lot of people who question me about stories about Florida and say that they've never heard of something like that before, it makes me laugh because I'm like, of course you haven't. Of course you haven't. That's why I'm here. I'm not saying to take my word as gospel. Always do your own research. Always look into things for yourself. But you're not going to hear about a lot of creepy stuff that's going on in certain areas of Florida if it's close to a tourist area. This is just a theory of mine. I'm not saying that anything has been released to confirm it. I'm not saying that it's automatically true just because I think it. But the closer that you get to areas of tourism in Florida, such as Disney World and South Beach, the more things stay under wraps. Because if they didn't, Florida would have a serious problem. There is a ley line that runs pretty much directly through Ocala National Forest. Another area of Florida that's well known for weird stuff that has a whole bunch of ley lines converging in it is the Bermuda Triangle. I know that there are going to be a whole bunch of people who say that I'm full of shit, they don't believe any of this, and more power to you. If that helps you sleep at night, then I am very happy for you. But one thing is for sure, you don't fuck with Ocala National Forest.
This is the disappearance of Echo Lloyd, a 47-year-old mother of 4, and she went missing from Edwards, Missouri on May 10th of 2020. Echo had recently moved to this area. After a divorce, she was looking for a new start. She found a nice rural property just north of Edwards. It's a very isolated property, down a very long dirt road, and she moved in the fall of 2019. May 10th was Mother's Day, and Echo's oldest daughter, Kelsey, stopped by her home to bring her flowers and a card. But when her daughter got there, Echo wasn't home. Her car wasn't in the driveway, so her daughter left the gift on the steps. She later tried to call her mother, but Echo didn't answer. And throughout the next week, she continued to call and still couldn't reach her mother. So on Friday, May 15th, she drove out to check on her. When she got there, Echo's car was in the driveway. The door was locked, but there was no sign of her. She noticed that one of the back windows was cracked open a little, so she was able to push that up and climb inside. When she got in there, she immediately knew that something was very wrong. There were piles of trash and open food containers on the bar, very unlike Echo, who kept a very clean house. And there was also a mattress pulled out onto the living room floor. When she walked into Echo's room, she found her purse. Inside was her wallet, her ID. It still had cash inside. And on the dresser, she noticed a pack of cigarettes that was a brand that her mom didn't usually smoke. The only things that seemed to be missing were her keys, her phone, her medications, and her pistol. And then outside, just laying on the ground, Kelsey found a ring that Echo always wears. Right then and there, she called the police. Search was later mounted, and her pistol was discovered in the woods on her property. They also found in the shed behind her house. Written on the wall of the shed in capital letters was "The Farm," with a number underneath. This area has a 573 area code. That number was a 417 number. And to make that factor even stranger, there were numerous flies inside of Echo's locked car. And it also smelled very strongly of manure. Shortly after Echo was reported missing, it came out that she had last been spotted in a Dollar General in Warsaw on May 10th. that Sunday, Mother's Day. And the family was able to speak to the cashier who checked Echo out, and she remembered seeing her because Echo was a regular customer, so this woman encountered her often. She'd noticed that day that Echo was not herself. She seemed very flustered, very disheveled, and she said that she had tried to purchase a prepaid phone, saying that she needed to call her kids, but Echo's payment would not go through. And the cashier offered to let her use the store phone, but Echo told her that there were people outside waiting for her and that they would know if she used that phone. It also came out that Echo had been having problems with a neighbor. This neighbor, Joshua Dwayne Smith, was a little younger than Echo, but the two had initially bonded, and they were friends. They spent a lot of time together. And to Echo, this was all about companionship. She was new in town, she lived alone, and she wanted a friend. But apparently, Josh wanted more. Echo had actually spoken often about how he was jealous and possessive. He had no respect for her boundaries. She'd tell him to leave her house, he'd come right back. He'd walk in the house completely unannounced. A few weeks before Echo's disappearance, she showed up at her daughter's house, saying that Josh had taken over her life. He'd taken her phone, he'd taken over her bank account, and he would not leave. And I find it very strange that as clingy and possessive as this man was with her, he was noticeably absent during the search for Echo. So here's a few things that we know about Josh Smith. He is known to be unpredictable. He is involved with drugs and had a past history of DWIs. Echo, however, has no history of drug use, but this was a kind-hearted woman. I believe she tried to look past that. But what nobody knew at the time about Josh was that he also lied a lot. He told Echo and her daughter that he worked at a farm as a farmhand and even offered Echo a job at one point. Something to do with cows. It turned out, after she disappeared, that he doesn't work on a farm. He's not a farmhand. This man works construction. But there is clearly a link to some farm because it was written on the shed wall, and her car smelled like a cow farm. All of this should have been enough to make Joshua Smith prime suspect number one. Immediately arrested. Immediately interrogated. Yet somehow, he was not. And here's what gets me about this case. Echo lived on this street. Well, Josh lived up here on this one. He lived with his grandfather, Larry, who just a few short weeks after Echo's disappearance passed away from a sudden fall in that same basement where Larry was found. Several days after the fall, I might add. Every single missing personal item of Echo Lloyd was found, yet somehow all of that was deemed circumstantial evidence. And in May of this year, the sheriff's office gave an update on Echo's case, saying it was always in their thoughts, but they have no leads. What do you mean there's no leads? I'm sorry, that looks like a significant lead to me. What in the actual fuck is happening inside these sheriff's departments? But I know one thing. There are 4 kids out there that deserve to know what happened to their mother. So if any of y'all know anything about Echo, please message me and let me know, or you can message Kelsey. I'm going to tag her below.
Was it Bigfoot or was it something much more nefarious? This is a story about the very strange disappearance of Teresa Beer. Now, Teresa was born on April 16th in 1971 to both of her parents, Shirley and David Beer. And unfortunately, she had anything but an easy life. Both of her parents were very abusive towards her, which led to her being removed by social services. And eventually, she was placed in the foster care system along with one of her sisters. Few years later, her father divorced his first wife, who was Teresa's mother, and ended up remarrying. Eventually, he was able to regain custody of Teresa, but unfortunately, his new wife was also very abusive to Teresa. And from there, Teresa ended up moving again to another family member, which happened to be her uncle, who was living in Fresno, California. But Teresa just was not having any luck with whoever she was living with. And that was because her uncle apparently allowed many of his friends to SA Teresa, and he also kept her home from school for multiple days at a time in order for her to babysit other children. And as you can imagine, all of this abuse definitely took its toll on Teresa, and by the age of 16 years old, she was classified as a quote-unquote slow learner. And many other people would also say that she was immature for her age, likely due to the fact that she just didn't get to develop at the same rate as everyone else. One of the friends her uncle had around was this guy here, and his name was Russell Skip Welch. He was a 43-year-old man, and he was a self-proclaimed Bigfoot expert. He was also known for being a painter in the area, and he also struggled with an addiction to meth. Now, at one point, Welch ended up asking Teresa's uncle if he could take her out camping in search for Bigfoot. And for whatever reason, her uncle ended up agreeing to this, which was extremely odd and inappropriate considering that Teresa was only 16 years old and this guy was in his 40s. And then on June 1st, 1987, Russell picked up Teresa from the home and told her uncle that he was going to be dropping her off at school. But instead of dropping her off at school, he ended up taking her here to an area known as Shut-Eye Peak.
And although he had asked her uncle for permission to take her camping, it's not really understood why he ended up lying to him and saying that he was going to take her to school. Later that day, Teresa's uncle ended up getting a call from her school saying that she had not attended class. And when they asked her if she was missing for whatever reason, he said that wasn't true and that she was just at home that day. And again, it's not understood why he ended up lying to the school, but anyways, he ended up searching for her on his own. But when he couldn't find her, by 9:30 p.m. that night, he ended up reporting her as missing. And when Russell returned back to Fresno from the mountains, there was no sign of Teresa with him. And then on June 5th, authorities took an opportunity to go visit Russell for a previous drunk driving allegation. And at the same time, they took this opportunity to question him about Teresa's whereabouts. Now, initially, he told police that he had dropped off Teresa at school on June 1st, but they knew right away that this was not true because the school had called Teresa's uncle. When they told him that he was lying, he then changed his story and said that while him and Teresa were camping, she decided to run off into the woods with another woman. He then went on to change his story several more times before fixating on one final story. And that was that Bigfoot had taken Teresa, and he even agreed to take authorities to the exact location where she had been abducted. However, when authorities arrived to the area at Shut-Eye Peak where he claimed the entire thing happened, there was no sign of a struggle. But they still carried out an extensive search in the area, and unfortunately, they turned up with 0 results. Russell also told them to the exact campsite where they had been, where authorities saw a large burned area that was about 3 by 8 feet. And on top of that, there were also some blankets that were hung up, a purse, a bra, a t-shirt, and a camera. And when they took a look at the camera, there were photos of Russell playing the guitar by one of the blankets. But in a surprising turn of events, they ended up discovering that this campsite where he took them was completely staged, and that the actual location where this entire thing happened was another canyon known as Ghost Canyon, approximately 20 miles away. And when police searched that area, they ended up finding a blue t-shirt that belonged to Russell that also had traces of meth in it. And a short while later, Russell was arrested for another crime of child stealing, but he was released on bail. And in September of 1987, right before he was set to go on trial, he ended up being released and all the charges were dropped against him because authorities didn't believe that they had enough evidence to convict him. And their main reason for doing this is because they didn't want to run into a double jeopardy situation where he could not be charged for the same crime later on if he were acquitted at trial. And this was because authorities still did not have enough evidence against him, let alone Teresa's body. So instead, they chose to wait out in case new evidence came to light. But unfortunately, no new evidence ever surfaced, and he just stuck to his story that Teresa was taken by Bigfoot. And surprisingly, there are a lot of people that tend to believe his theory on Bigfoot, and that is thanks to the missing 411 phenomenon. Considering the fact that there are a very high amount of people that go missing every year in the forests and national parks, including in the mountains, with an underlying belief that there's something very supernatural going on here, including that Bigfoot could be responsible for these disappearances. Obviously, the second theory is that Russell was directly responsible for what happened to Teresa. But shockingly enough, police ended up offering a reduced sentence to Russell if he just admitted to what happened to Teresa. But even with that on the table, he denied any involvement and stuck to his story that Bigfoot took her. Now, the last theory has something to do with 2 other people known as the Speed Freak Killers. These 2 were notorious serial killers that took the lives of over 70 people across California in the 80s and the 90s. And their nickname comes from the fact that they were high while they did all of these crimes. But to this day, we have absolutely no idea what actually happened to Teresa. And her body was never discovered either. So like always, let me know what you guys think. Was Russell responsible for what happened to her? Or was it Bigfoot like he always claimed?
On August 29th, 2001, 6-year-old Haley Zega goes on a hike in the Ozark National Forest with her grandparents. They had originally planned on hiking down to this waterfall, but Haley wasn't super fond of the outdoors. She's 6 years old. She's starting to get kind of tired and grumpy. It was getting kind of late at this point, and the grandparents decide to start heading back. But Haley ends up pitching a fit, and she sits down on a rock, and she said she wasn't moving unless her grandparents carried her. So the grandparents decide to do like the quick, okay, fine, and they pretend to walk off, and Haley did decide to start following them after this, but because she was so tired, she would often stop a lot along the trail. So she was walking and then she'd stop a lot, and the grandparents decide that at one point they're going to walk a little bit ahead of her and just kind of wait for her to catch up. They were pretty much watching her though the entire time. But in just the few moments that the grandparents had decided to walk ahead, they would lose sight of Haley. Haley says that she could not see or hear them anymore, and she just remembers walking through dense forest. Haley kept walking until she came to a split in the trail, and she decides to go down one side of this trail, hoping that it would lead her to her grandparents. But this trail just ended up taking her further into deeper and deeper woods, and soon Haley realized she really was lost. On the first day that she was lost, Haley finds the Buffalo River, which she's hoping will lead her back to civilization, so she hatches a plan that she's going to follow this river. Now, at this point, there was a massive search and rescue effort underway to look for Haley. In fact, it was the largest in Arkansas history. Haley could even see the helicopters flying overhead, and she would prop herself up on the rocks by the river, hoping that they would see her, but they never did. On the second and third days, Haley is still trying to follow the river. She's getting hungrier, she's getting more thirsty. Obviously, she was scared to actually drink from the river because it might be contaminated, and she's screaming her name. She's doing everything she can to hope that someone will find her and notice where she is. Finally, towards the end of the third day, Haley was found by two men on horseback. These men weren't actually part of the official search party, but they knew the area really well, and when they went to the official search party to tell them, hey, you might want to look in this area, their request was denied because they didn't believe Haley could have actually gotten this far. So they didn't want to waste resources looking for her in areas they didn't think she could possibly be. So thankfully, these men decided to search there anyways, and they did find Haley. Now, when Haley was questioned about what happened to her while she was in the woods, she told everyone that she had been fine because she had her imaginary friend Alicia with her the entire time. Now, people thought maybe this was a coping mechanism, but Haley said that this imaginary friend would play games with her, they sang songs, and Alicia would even help Haley trek down the 200-foot bluffs to make sure she could get back to the river, and these would have been difficult for an adult, much less a child. When people started looking into this imaginary friend story, they realized that there actually had been a little girl named Alana, which is pretty similar to Alicia, who had gone missing in the same area 23 years prior. Alana was 4 years old, she had black hair and brown eyes, and this is exactly as Haley described Alicia. Haley said that this little girl was with her from the moment she got lost until the moment she was found, and she had never had an imaginary friend before or after that. So I'm curious if you guys think maybe this was really all just a coping mechanism, or was this Alicia spirit a guardian angel, or maybe a ghost? Was she some sort of spirit guide? Haley is now an adult, and she has shared her story several times before on YouTube.
On November 15th, 2015, a group of longtime hunting buddies went into the woods of New York. They had no idea that decision would change their lives forever and get the attention of the FBI. This is the unsolved disappearance of Tom Messick. 82-year-old Tom Messick wasn't just some weekend hunter. He was an 82nd Airborne veteran and had been a survival instructor for years. On that fateful day, he and his friends decided to try a new hunting spot near Lily Pond, a place they hadn't been before. He and his friends got a late start in the day, so to make most of their time, they used a technique called a deer drive. You see, a couple of the hunters would set up near a ridge about 100 yards apart, and the other hunters would go into the woods to scare the deer and hopefully push them towards the watchers or the ones waiting by the ridge. Tom, being 82 years old and having some health problems, was sat near the ridge in a stationary position. Nothing about this felt particularly dangerous. The hunt lasted for about 3 hours, but something felt off. There were no deer. In fact, no one had seen really any wildlife. Then one of the hunters about 100 yards away from Tom's position heard a strange whooshing sound or a snapping sound, but he really didn't think anything of it. When the hunt ended, the group gathered back at their trucks. But Tom wasn't there. They called out his name, no response. They fired their rifles in the air to signal their position, nothing. They called him on the radio and got silence. Something was wrong, but initially they didn't panic. They just set out into the woods to look for him. They went to his last position. He wasn't there. After several hours of searching, they contacted local authorities, and within 24 hours, a massive search was underway. They had helicopters, volunteers, canine units, and even divers scoured the area, but there was nothing. No clothing, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Tom had vanished. On the fourth day, shockingly, the FBI showed up. Now, the FBI doesn't show up in cases like these unless there's potential signs of foul play, but the strange thing is, there was no evidence of anything. Tom was just gone, and not even the dogs could pick up any type of scent. When they tried to follow his scent, it just led them to his last hunting location where he'd been sitting. Tom was no ordinary hunter. He was an expert, and he knew how to handle himself in these type of situations. He knew to sit put if he was lost, and he knew how to signal for help, and yet he was just gone. How does an 82-year-old man disappear without any trace? Was it a medical emergency and he wandered off? If so, why was he not found? Was he taken by an animal? If that's the case, why was there no blood or signs of a struggle? Or perhaps was there something else in the woods, something strange that was lurking in the darkness? We might never know. What do you think really happened?
This is one of the strangest missing 411 stories that I've came across. This case involves a 3-year-old boy named John who was camping with his family at Mount Shasta in California. The family had chosen to camp next to a creek because it was supposed to be a good spot for fishing. Around 6 p.m. one night, the family was cooking dinner. John was playing, and for only a moment while his parents' backs were turned, John disappeared. Like he was there one second and gone the next. The family is frantically searching everywhere. I mean, how could this little boy have gone more than a few yards away in such a short amount of time at only 3 years old? But John wasn't responding to anyone's calls, so police and park rangers got involved and everyone searched for 5 hours. The sun had gone down at this point, the family was getting desperate, but John was found safe and alive, curled up in a patch of grass. Strangely, he was found in an open area on a trail that had already been searched multiple times. It was like he had just been placed on the side of this trail where he could easily be found. So John was alive and well, the family is happy, but 3 weeks later he was staying with his grandmother, who he called Cappy, because her real name was Kathy. And John told Kathy something disturbing. He said he didn't like his other grandmother, Cappy, as much as her. And Kathy was confused. She was like, "What do you mean, John? You don't have another grandmother that you call Cappy." This is when John told her that while he was lost in the woods a few weeks ago, someone that he called his other grandmother, Cappy, grabbed him. John said this woman had the same hair and face as his grandma Cappy, but she took him to a cave that was filled with spiders. She then did some sort of medical examination on John, told him that he was not from Earth and that his parents didn't know about this. John said that when he saw the other Grandma Cappy in the light of the cave, that her skin shimmered and made her look like a robot. Then this being that looked like the other Grandma Cappy took John back to the trail where he could easily be found. Now, maybe this all just seems like a child's wild imagination, but Kathy, the real grandmother, had been camping in the same area that John had disappeared a year before. One morning while she was camping, she had woken up outside of her tent, face down on the ground, with no memory of how she had gotten there. She also had a painful lump on the back of her head, which she thought was a spider bite. When she got back to the tent, the friend she was camping with had a similar bite, and he was really sick. The night before, Kathy and her friend woke up with these bites on them. They had been hearing weird noises in the woods, so they pointed their flashlights at the trees. They saw red eyes staring back at them, which gave them an eerie feeling, but they brushed it off. But after the events of the next morning, John's disappearance and his story about the other Cappy, Kathy believed that those red eyes staring back at her were whatever that thing was that abducted her grandson and took on her.
This is one case that still haunts me. The story of the disappearance of Jason Jolkowski is one of the weirdest things that you'll ever read about, and it's haunting because to this day, this mystery has never been solved. So let's take a look at it. So this is Jason Jolkowski. He was born in 1981 and lived in Omaha, Nebraska all his life. And this story takes place in 2001. So on Wednesday, June 13th, 2001, Jason was called into work early. So initially, Jason planned on walking to his job, which was 4 miles away, due to the fact that his car was in a repair shop that day. But he eventually made plans for a friend to meet him at a high school that was nearby. So this high school, Benson High School in Omaha, Nebraska, was only half a mile from Jason's house. Literally an 8-block walk. And that's where his friend was supposed to meet him. So just take a look at this photo. This is the exact route that Jason was going to take to the high school. It's only a 10-minute walk, and keep in mind he was about to make this walk in the middle of the morning in broad daylight, in a city like Omaha, Nebraska, where crimes like disappearances and murders don't really happen all that frequently. So at 10:45 a.m. that morning, a neighbor saw Jason helping his younger brother with the trash outside of his home, and at some point right after that, he left to go on this walk to go meet his friend. And during this walk, Jason vanished off the face of the earth. So to this day, no trace of Jason has ever been found. There were no remains ever recovered. Nobody has seen anybody that's ever looked like Jason. Nobody reported seeing somebody being abducted on the day that he went missing. Nobody even reported seeing anything out of the ordinary. It's as if he simply vanished literally into thin air. They even checked the security camera footage from the school that he was supposed to be walking to that day, and the security camera videos showed that Jason never arrived. It was somewhere on that half-a-mile walk when he vanished. Now, Jason's parents have suggested that they believe he may have been abducted and killed, but with no body ever having been found, that theory is just really hard to prove. And yeah, it's been over 20 years since this happened, and no trace of Jason has ever been found. That's why it's a case that will haunt me. I mean, it's just scary to think that you can be making a half-a-mile walk in the middle of the day, in the middle of your city, and go missing, and no one will ever even find a piece of your clothing.
Some missing 411 cases end with the person being found alive. And this is what happened to Stephen Kubacki after he was missing for 15 months. In February of 1978, Stephen Kubacki was a college student in Michigan. Stephen decided to go cross-country skiing. He decided that he would go do his cross-country skiing near Lake Michigan, which was frozen at the time. Stephen didn't show up the rest of that day, and no one thought anything really weird of it. They thought maybe he just went further than he meant to, and he was going to be back late. But when he didn't show up the next day, his family started to get very worried. This is when his family decided to file a missing persons report. We don't often see this, but this time police jumped into action right away and started searches, which is very refreshing in a case of a missing adult. Eventually, these searches found his skis and poles discarded on a beach of Lake Michigan, and they found footsteps going to the water's edge, and then they simply disappeared. Because it was confirmed that the skis and poles were his, it was assumed that the footprints were as well, but there was no trace of where Stephen could have gone. Thinking he could have fallen into the water through the ice, they started looking for breaks in the ice or cracks, anything that would tell them somebody had gone through the ice, but they found absolutely nothing. When this gave them no new leads, they ended up searching around the rest of the area, and when they got back to the beach at one point, his backpack was where his skis and poles had been, but it had not been there when they found the skis and poles. As I'm sure you can understand, many people were kind of confused by this, so they asked each other, like, did you see this backpack here? Was it here when we were here last time? Did we miss it? But no one had seen it when they were there before. After finding this backpack, they found nothing else that would lead them to where Stephen could be or tell them what happened to him. This case took a very unexpected turn on May 15th of 1979, just 15 months after his disappearance. Stephen's father had heard the doorbell to their home ring, so he went to go check who it was, and on the porch was Stephen. This is very odd in itself. Obviously, he was missing for 15 months. No one had seen him. No one knew where he could have been, but the fact that Stephen couldn't recall anything when being asked what had happened was even odder. Stephen stated that earlier that morning he had woken up in a field about 35 miles away from where his parents lived, and that's all he could remember. But this was a few hundred miles away from where his skis and his poles had been found. Stephen also recalled waking up in clothing that was not his, with a bag that was not his either. This bag was filled to the brim with maps that he had no recollection of getting. Stephen states to this day that he has no recollection of what happened for the 15 months he was gone. Doctors checked him out and stated there is nothing wrong with Stephen's mental state, and they had no explanation for why he couldn't remember the last 15 months. Where Stephen disappeared from is known to be on the edge of what is called the Lake Michigan Triangle. It stretches from Ludington, Michigan to Benton Harbor, Michigan, and then to Manitowoc, Wisconsin. And you can kind of think of it as a Bermuda Triangle, but in a Great Lake. The first instance of something unexplainable happening here dates back to 1679 when the Lee Griffins set off to try and find a northwest passage to China and Japan. All went well until they reached the Michigan Triangle and were never seen again.
In 1891, a ship named the Thomas Hume went across the lake to go pick up lumber. This boat and its 7-man crew have never been found, even though there have been extensive searches. Not one piece of evidence has been found to suggest they were even there at all. In 1950, a Northwest Orient Airlines flight 2501 traveling from New York to Minneapolis requested cruising altitude of 2500 due to bad turbulence. This could not be granted. The plane never made it out of the Michigan Triangle and no wreckage was ever found. And there are many other unexplainable things that have happened in and around the Michigan Triangle, and it seems that Stephen Kubaki's disappearance is another one of those things. But Stephen is not the only one to have disappeared from this area and reappear without knowing anything that happened to them. In 1990, an 11-year-old boy was walking his dog when he disappeared. Searches started right away, but he was found in a place that others were sure had been searched before. When asked about what happened, he said he could not remember. There's so many other stories of disappearances in this area, and they just make absolutely no sense.
Now, this case is absolutely mental, and you just won't believe what happened. So this man here, the elderly man with the grey hair, holding up the sticky thing, his name is Vasil Gorgas, and he actually went missing in Romania 30 years ago. Now, he's turned up after being missing for 30 years, wearing exactly the same clothes, with a travel ticket in his pocket from the day he went missing. Now, Vasil is actually a farmer, and he vanished 3 decades ago and reappeared with no memory of where he's been or what happened. He's wearing the same clothes and with a train ticket in his pocket from the day he disappeared. 411, missing 411. He vanished at 65 and he's just come back as a 95-year-old man wearing the same clothes. How could this happen? Now, Vasil, who is now 95, actually returned home in 2021. Claiming he'd never been missing at all after he disappeared in 1991. Now, Vasil was actually known to leave town for a couple of days at a time where he would go to sell cattle, but this time he didn't return for 30 years. After several days of no contact with his family became increasingly worried. Although he frequently left town, he always stayed in contact and usually returned, but this time he completely vanished. Now, his family contacted the police, searches were done, nothing was ever found, and days turned into weeks, turned into months and years, and his family had no answers until one day after 30 years, Vasil just reappeared at the family gate to the farm, like he'd never been anywhere at all. Now, witnesses claim that Vasil was dropped off at the farm gates by a car that just sped off and no one got his number plate. And he since has reportedly undergone medical checks. Doctors conclude he's in good condition, barring some neurological problems, but he cannot remember anything, although he was well kept and he seemed fine, but he just cannot remember where he had been. He said that he'd never left home for one day. Now, his family are obviously appealing for anyone to come forward to explain what happened with those 30-year period. They want to know, where was he? Was he okay? Was someone looking after him? But their plea has been met with some conspiracy theories. Many of the people locally believe that he has been in prison that whole time, that he was leading some kind of double life and a life of crime caught up with him. Those people who have that theory explain that that's why he would be wearing the same clothes with the same ticket in the pocket, because he would have been given his clothes back after he was released from prison. A handful of psychiatrists, on the other hand, say that Vasil may have dissociative personality disorder. That includes having 2 different personalities, and these psychiatrists suggest it may have led him to lead a different life for 3 decades before coming back to the one he had previously. Now, the other group of people think that Vasil was kidnapped and forced into hard labour, and once he was medically and age-wise not strong enough to carry on doing their labour, they brought him back home. What do you think happened? I literally just can see aliens everywhere.
We need to talk about the Forest of Vanishing Children in California, because what the fuck? It's an area of rough wilderness and mountains just outside of LA. This was the site of several disappearances, mostly children, that is still unsolved to this day. Near the San Gabriel Mountains and the Sierra Pelona Mountains is the Angeles National Forest. The forest is over 700,000 acres in area. In August 1956, 11-year-old Brenda Howell and her friend 13-year-old Donald Lee Baker decided to take their bikes and explore the San Gabriel Canyon area. The children vanished, which launched a search of police, Navy personnel, and over 100 volunteers, but all they were able to find was Brenda's bike and Donald's jacket. The bike and the jacket were found about a quarter mile away from where the children were last seen. 2 months later, Donald's bike turned up at Glendora Elementary School. A student reported finding it in the forest shortly after the 2 children went missing. The Following year, Eldon Bowman and his brother-in-law Gordon Wicks decided to take a hike in Altadena, California with their young children, the oldest of which was Tommy Bowman, who was 8 years old. At one point during the hike, Tommy went ahead of the group and rounded a bend. But when the rest of the group rounded that same bend, Tommy was completely gone and has not been seen since. Their home was only a mile away, so they figured Tommy had to be close, but when they called him and he didn't answer, they also launched a search party. The search lasted over a week with ground personnel, aircrafts, and canines, but no sign or scent of Tommy was ever found. 2 weeks after Tommy's disappearance, an anonymous letter arrived at the Bowman household saying that he was still alive and well and in the presence of an unknown adult male. Another anonymous letter said that Tommy was alive and living in Oklahoma, but ultimately nothing ever came of these and he was never found. Next to disappear was 6-year-old Bruce, who was camping with his YMCA group, which included 80 children and adults, in Buckhorn Flat, which is within the Angeles National Forest. On July 12, 1960, Bruce was hiking with an adult supervisor and other children only 300 yards away from camp when he got tired and was sent back. When little Bruce was just about to reach the camp, the supervisor turned around to continue on with the other kids, but Bruce never made it back. When it was realized that Bruce was missing, only a few moments later, a search was launched, including with police, but he was completely gone. Police ultimately decided that he just got tired and disoriented since there were a bunch of cliffs around, but his body was never found and neither were any other clues to Bruce's whereabouts. And then on March 6, 1970, a 51-year-old man named Mac Ray Edwards walked into the LA Police Department and calmly admitted to sexually assaulting and murdering 6 children during those years. More in part 2.
One of the most terrifying things to me is when someone vanishes into thin air with absolutely no logical explanation as to what happened to them, especially when they disappear in a short amount of time in an extremely short distance. I am a firm believer that people don't just disappear, but that's what happened to 20-year-old Ryan Stuka, and the circumstances surrounding his disappearance are just really bizarre, so let's talk about it. Ryan Stuka was just 1 month shy of his 21st birthday when he mysteriously disappeared on February 17th, 2018. He lived in Beaumont, Alberta, where the rest of his family lived. But on December 1st, 2017, he decided to move to Sun Peaks, which is a really tiny ski resort village in British Columbia. He had never left home before, but he was really excited for this move because he was moving with his best friend to go and do one of the things he loved most, which was snowboarding. He and his friend were going to spend the season snowboarding and working as lift operators at the Sun Peaks Village Ski Resort. And although he was a little nervous to leave home, he was really excited. But he was only going to be there for a few months anyway, as he'd go back home to Alberta in the spring. But before he got the chance to go back home, he would disappear, leaving behind no clues. And what exactly happened that winter night has never been explained. So the day before Ryan disappeared, which was Friday, February 16th, he worked the full day and then went to his home in Sun Peaks, which he shared with a few roommates. Later that night, Ryan and a few of his friends/roommates went to a silent disco event that was being hosted at a local pub. And then after, they all went to a house party not far away located on Burfield Drive. A few hours would go by, everyone was having fun, and then at 2 a.m., one of Ryan's roommates got tired and decided to head home. They all lived just a short walk away from this house party, and it wasn't unusual for them to just walk home. A few minutes later, another one of Ryan's roommates decided to get up and leave the party, also heading home. And this roommate thought Ryan was right behind him. At 2:10 a.m., Ryan was seen standing up, and he was believed to have been putting on his coat and shoes to go home as well. But after this, Ryan vanished. This was the last time he was ever seen alive. He never made it home that night, and when he didn't show up for work the next day, his roommates and friends knew something was horribly wrong. Ryan never missed work, and the fact that he wasn't answering their calls and texts, they just knew something wasn't quite right. They tried looking at security footage and called everyone Ryan knew in the area as well as local hospitals, but nobody knew where Ryan was or what happened to him. It was at this point that his roommates called his parents to let him know that Ryan was missing, and then they reported him missing to the police at 8:47 p.m. His parents lived over 9 hours away, but when they heard Ryan was missing, they packed their bags and immediately took off for Sun Peaks. The Kamloops RCMP launched a massive search for Ryan involving tracking dogs, drones, infrared cameras, snowmobiles, and helicopters. And on top of police searching, Ryan's parents and hundreds of volunteers diligently searched the entire village. But absolutely no trace of Ryan was ever found. It's believed that Ryan left the house party that night and started to walk home. But the biggest question is what happened to him in that short distance? It wasn't unusual for Ryan to go out with his friends and socialize. And since he didn't know the area super well, he never just wandered off without them. So for him to just vanish off the face of the earth like this was scary and overall just very strange. At the beginning of the investigation, police thought maybe he had been drinking at the party and became too intoxicated, maybe passing out somewhere outside, which was obviously very time sensitive. Because the night Ryan went missing, the weather dropped to below -14 degrees Fahrenheit and had snowed about 8 inches. So if that was the case and he did end up passing out somewhere outside, it seemed likely likely that he was just buried in snow somewhere along the route that he would have taken to get home. But after digging through the snow and as time passed and all the snow melted, there were still no signs of Ryan. Here we are today, 7 years later, and not one single clue as to what happened to him has ever surfaced. Over the years though, there have been three main theories as to what could have happened to him. Theory number one is that he did end up getting lost in the woods after leaving the party that night. There is a good possibility that he was intoxicated and ended up getting lost since he wasn't extremely used to the area and died of exposure. But you would think that after all this time that something would have been found by now, like some of his remains or his clothing or any of his personal belongings that he had on him that night. But not even one piece of his clothing was found. One thing that was brought up about this theory is that he could have been attacked by a wild animal after leaving the party. But again, there was no evidence left behind of anything, let alone an animal attack. You'd think that if he was attacked by an animal that some blood would be left behind, or drag marks, or even ripped clothing, but there was absolutely nothing. Another theory is that he was met with foul play to some extent. Some people believe that after leaving the party that night that he could have been a victim of a hit and run. And after googling hit and run cases in Sun Peak, I'm honestly kind of shocked how many there were in the last 10 years, so this does seem like a potential possibility. The theory is that he was hit by a car accidentally, and whoever hit him moved his body elsewhere, either off the mountain or out of Sun Peaks altogether. But again, you'd think that there would be some evidence of this in the area, like tire marks or blood left behind, but there was nothing. The last theory is that something happened to Ryan at the house party that night, either accidentally or on purpose, and it was covered up in some way. Some people suspect that Ryan could have overdosed accidentally in the house, and the people at the party helped cover it up. Other people believe that he could have had his life taken in that house by another person, and although there isn't much known about the house party that night, it was searched. So if something truly did happen there, I'm sure evidence would have been found by now. Kind of adding onto this theory is what a man who was staying at a home near Ryan's house had to say. This man said that on the night Ryan disappeared, he heard a guy who was pretty angry yelling to get in the effing car. Now, this could be anything. I know when it's super cold out, I hate when people take a long time getting into the car, so this doesn't sound super unusual to me, but it could also mean something more sinister. And then there's what a retired RCMP investigator had to say when investigating Ryan's disappearance. He initially thought that Ryan just accidentally got lost and died of exposure, but then he interviewed one of Ryan's friends, and that interview changed his mind a little bit. The investigator said that this friend was extremely nervous and acting really strange, and although this information was given to authorities, nothing ever came of it. This theory that something happened at the house party and everyone helped cover it up doesn't seem very likely to me, just based on the fact that when you have that many people in on something, someone at some point is going to say something, and 7 years have passed without a word. It is clear though that something bad happened to Ryan, as there's been no activity on his cell phone, social media, or bank accounts since that fateful night. The Kamloops RCMP hasn't ruled out foul play, but they also haven't found anything criminally suspicious, or anything at all for that matter. They also said that there's no evidence that Ryan ever left the Sun Peaks area. So as time passes, Ryan's case is still frozen in time, and with a lack of any evidence, it's left many wondering what really happened to him. There's currently a $25,000 reward for any information leading to Ryan's whereabouts. His family has gone on to make this Facebook page where they continue to post updates and any information about the case. It kind of created this movement where little green dinosaurs with some of Ryan's information attached to it have been placed all around the world. When people see them, they often take pictures of it and post it to the Facebook group. And in a way, it's a way for Ryan to travel all over the world and touch so many people. The green dinosaur stemmed from Ryan loving dinosaurs as a kid. His mom said that when he was little, they all played a game together where they had to guess the type of dinosaur. In one of his mom's first ever posts on the Facebook page, she said, quote, "Ryan, wherever you are, let's talk about dinosaurs." And that just breaks my heart. The not knowing is literally devastating, and his family just deserves answers. I just can't fathom that 1 second you're living your life and the next, everything changes. These are some of Ryan's characteristics and what he was last seen wearing. If you have any information about his disappearance, please contact the number on the screen.
What happened to Stacey Harris? Stacey was just 14 years old in 1981 when she went missing. Her parents were George and Carol, and she had two sisters, Sandra and Stephanie. She also had a brother named George, and the family lived in Saratoga, California. In July of 1981, Stacey and her father decided to go on this trip to Yosemite National Park. She was having some personal struggles lately, and this seemed like a good way for them to connect and get back to a baseline of sorts. They were on this trip with several other people, though reports do vary. Some people say that there were 7 people in total, including the guides. Other reports say that there were up to 20 people, including the guides. But this seems like it differs depending on who you're asking. But on July 17th of 1981, they went on this trip, and at first they rode for 4 miles. They rode up to the Upper Cathedral Lakes, and they used the John Muir Trail, and I probably said that wrong, but this is the time that they stopped for some food, and this was at about 3 p.m. Then they decided to ride for a couple more hours, and this time they stopped at Sunrise High Sierra Camps. Now, this was about 3 miles southeast of Tenia Lake, and I probably said that wrong as well, but and another 1.5 miles from Sunrise Lakes. Now, this is where they were planning on staying the night, so the group got their stuff together and were just kind of relaxing and freshening up from this long trip that they had had that day. So Stacy cleaned up, took a shower, changed her clothes, and decided that she wanted to walk towards the Sunrise Lakes to take some pictures. They had all been in the saddle all day long, and she just wanted to stretch her legs and go explore. Another member of the group named Gerald Stewart, he was about 70 to 77 years of age, and he was from the same community that Stacy and her family lived in, but she decided that she wanted to go on a walk with him. She also asked her father if he wanted to go. He declined and just let her go on, but he did advise her to change from the flip-flops she was wearing to some hiking boots. So when Stacy left, she was wearing an off-white pullover windbreaker, a white jersey blouse, leggings, and her gray hiking boots. Stacy was seen walking over to Gerald, and then they decided to go down this path to Sunrise Lakes. But shortly after walking about 20 minutes into this hike, Gerald decided that he needed to sit down and catch a breath. This wasn't going to be a long hike for them. This was about 45 minutes or 1.6 miles. Another camper named Chris Grimes saw Stacy taking pictures, and he kind of watched her until she was out of view. The sad part is that this is the last time that Stacy was ever seen again. After she had been gone for a while, her father grew concerned, so he started asking if anyone had seen her. He even walked down the trail that she would have taken, and he expected to find her fairly quickly, but he didn't. He went back to the camp, and then the entire group that was with him went looking for Stacy, and they could not find her. That's when they reported her missing to the park rangers. A very large search team was quickly assembled, and this was about 100 people to 150 people. They used scent dogs, they were using helicopters, and they were concentrating on a 3 to 5 mile radius. The dogs were unable to find any scent or trace of Stacy, and they believe this is because of the recent rainfall they had received. The helicopters were in the air for over 40 hours, and they found absolutely nothing. This went on until July 20th, and then ground searches began until July 22nd, and the search was called off on July 26th. There was no footprints found of Stacy. There was basically nothing. It seemed as if she had basically just vanished into thin air. But what exactly happened to Stacy? There's a lot of theories out there, like she just went off course and got lost, that an animal might have attacked her like a black bear, or that there was some sort of foul play. But literally there's nothing. There is no evidence of any of this. Stacy has come up in the missing 411 files, and many people believe that she's one of these people. And the missing 411 is a rabbit hole that I've never personally gone down, but maybe I should one day. But really, it just seems as if she vanished into thin air, and her parents have no answers. Here's an age progression photo of what Stacy might look like today. So what are your thoughts on this case? Do you think that this was something supernatural, or was it just a misadventure? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and follow for more true crime.
What is the most paranormal missing persons case you've ever come across? Mine is the case of Carl Landers. Now, before I start this, I must preface that the area that Carl Landers went missing in is a very mystical place. That mountain is called Mount Shasta, a mountain that has many legends and lore. On May 21st, 1999, 69-year-old Carl Herbert Landers from Orlando, California decided to climb to the top of Mount Shasta. He was joined by two of his good friends, Milton, who was 64, and Barry, who was 60. All three of them were part of the Orlando Roadrunners, a local running club. Now, despite their ages, these men were known to be really active and very, very fit. On Friday, May 21st, 1999, at 3 p.m., they set off on Mount Shasta's bunny trailhead to summit Mount Shasta. They spent a night on the site called 50/50. Now, the day they set off, Carl actually had altitude sickness, so he took some Diamox, which is something that's supposed to help ease any sickness from high elevations. Now, one of the known side effects of that medication is diarrhea, which Carl indeed had. Suffice to say that Carl was not feeling 100% during his trip, but he decided to just sleep it off. The next day came and Carl decided to continue on with the trek. However, he told Milt and Barry that he was going to go on ahead since he didn't want to slow them down. So they're like, okay, go ahead, Carl. And that was their point of separation. Now, even with Carl starting ahead of them, you need to understand that Carl was actually wearing a bright pink jacket that his wife had gave him to wear for the trek. So you could easily spot Carl. And where they were hiking is a broad open area with no trees, no holes, no crevices. So it would be impossible for them to lose sight of Carl because there's no way he could outrun their eye of sight. If they even gave him an hour ahead of them to go ahead and start, he would still be in full view. However, at one point, Milt and Barry took their eyes off of him for just like a second, and Carl just vanished. To this day, Carl Landers still missing. No clue, no trace, no body. There are no holes, caves, or crevices to fall into or hide within. So even if he had fallen, his body should have been easily found, especially with the bright pink coat he had on that his wife made him wear. And if it were foul play, then that would mean someone would have needed to carry his body back down the mountain. Something no one, including rangers, witnessed. That or bury Carl, but there were no signs of disturbed snow or dirt. The area is broad and open with no trees located less than 900 feet from the campsite, clearly visible from where they were. There's no reason he should have vanished. Milt Gaines mentioned that he told Carl to go ahead to a small bare spot called Lake Helen, which only was 900 feet from their camp. Carl was fully visible as the other two packed up their gear. It's important to tell you again that at no time could anyone run so fast as to be out of sight from those two hikers. To me, this is absolutely paranormal. What are your thoughts?